Hello and welcome to the Haaretz podcast. I'm Amir Tibon, filling in this week for Ellison Kaplan-Sommer. Here in Israel, we almost had another round of fighting with Iran, but it was aborted at the last minute. We'll be speaking about that and also about the situation in Gaza after the announcement of an agreement between the Board of Peace. How long will that agreement survive? And last but not least, we also are supposedly on the verge of another security crisis in the West Bank. So about all of these optimistic yet very important issues, we'll be speaking with our in-house defense analyst, Amos Harael. Hi, Amos.
Hi, Amil. Thanks for inviting me.
I have to notify the listeners that Amos is my go-to person for these subjects, not only in the studio and in the podcast. First of all, I literally read every column you write about this in Haaretz, and lately there have been too many of them.
Tell me about it.
Yeah, and we also speak about it usually once a day. But to update our listeners, I think we should start perhaps with Iran, because that's the largest of the stories, the one that has the most global impact. And I guess the question I want to ask you, Amos, is what's going on with Donald Trump?
Bottom line is nobody has a clue. Look, Trump got himself involved in a war that he knew how to start but doesn't know how to end. He has admitted himself that he was planning for a very short operation, whether it was a few days or a few weeks. We're entering
I think it was 2 weeks and then 6 weeks, right? Those were the figures we kept hearing. And now it's 6 months almost.
We're approaching 6 months. And he's way over his head. And there are no good solutions right now. And he's coasted somehow in the last few weeks by we're going around in loops. What was it? What was the movie from the 90s? Groundhog Day.
Yes.
In Hebrew, it's called Lakum Etmol Baboker. Wake up yesterday morning. The same things happen every 24 hours, and for most, it's not 24. In reality, it's
the cycle,
every week.
Right? Yeah.
The cycle repeats itself, and nobody remembers. And we keep asking the same questions, and I keep having the same. Not only you regarding Gaza, but everybody I know has the same questions regarding Iran, because this affects the whole country. And yet again...
What about my flight, I guess? That's a question you've been getting a lot recently, right? Because
from some of our editors as well.
People are flying out and they want to know if another round of fighting will begin and cause delays.
Will there be a way back? Yeah. So this was the reality. This past weekend was the worst of them all because it seemed more serious. It didn't seem like empty
even
threats.
You wrote that. Not to embarrass you, but even you... For a second, it may happen.
I added the caveat that you never know with Trump, and that previous threats did not materialize. And yet he seemed more serious about that, and people were very, very serious here. Let's call it air forces in the region, okay? They were put on very high alert.
Regional pilots
were
called
put on
back
very
to base.
High alert, called back to base. Vacations were canceled. People actually... abroad were asked to return home because certain armies and air forces were waiting for a possibility of full-scale escalation. On top of this, you have to add the people around Netanyahu. You can see Netanyahu's mouthpieces in the Israeli media. It's pretty preparing for this and leaking certain information which might have led you to the assumption that total war was about to break out. And then he stopped, and that's not the first time that this has happened.
What happened, right? Because we were all in this mood. I think it was basically Saturday night when we went to bed with the assumption that we're going to wake up from alarms. And Sunday early morning, there was the announcement.
Yeah, he tweeted that they asked nicely, they begged, whatever. We're back on track with negotiations. There are very good signs of a deal, blah, blah, blah. Now, I think in reality, first of all, he doesn't want the war to escalate. This is not what he signed in for. He never assumed that this would take so long and cost so much money. And also there's a loss of life even on the American side. It's not doing him any good when you think of the upcoming midterm elections in early November.
Less than 3 months by now.
Yeah. And on top of this, you have the requests of some neighboring countries in our region, not necessarily Israel. Actually, I think Netanyahu is actually pushing for resuming the war. But MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, it was published that he actually spoke to Trump and asked him not to intervene and not to strike Iran this time. I think the countries in the Gulf are very, very worried about the outcome mostly because what Trump and Netanyahu are threatening Iran with is an energy war, hitting Iranian infrastructure sites all over the place and Iran's energy market. And Iran would retaliate by hitting similar targets in Saudi Arabia, in the UAE, in Qatar, and in Israel as well. They've threatened Israel specifically regarding our gas fields in the Eastern Mediterranean. So for all of these reasons...
Although I assume we are a little less vulnerable to this threat compared to the Saudis, Emiratis, and others.
That's true, but also we've been through 2 Iranian campaigns, and there were serious losses here. Dozens of lives were lost. We've seen apartment buildings in Tel Aviv, Bet Shemesh, and so on going...
The Weizmann Institute.
In flames. It's a serious matter. So if there's no immediate chance of a total change in the strategic reality of the region on the one hand, and if it could be very costly on the other, you can see why some people are not very happy about this possible outcome.
I think for many of our listeners, there is one sentence you said there which is almost obvious to Israeli listeners, but could be surprising to someone hearing us abroad, which is that Netanyahu, who has his own election coming up on October 27, just a week before the US midterms, actually wants the war resumed. And we understand that for Trump, an energy crisis and rising fuel prices is bad ahead of the midterms. Why does Netanyahu want a war ahead of his re-election?
So, first of all, he hasn't said that in so many words. Sometimes the people around him say the silent part loud. Right now, it's obvious that he is not happy about the results of the polls, the public opinion polls, who show Gadi Eisenkot and the anti-Netanyahu camp as leading. He wants to survive by any means necessary. And if that includes a possible scenario of a war, then so be it. It's probably better for him to gamble on that than...
Because it would help him electorally or postpone the election? What would it do?
It will create a constant state of alarm. There will be some panic in the Israeli public. Some people may consider... I think this is nonsense because we've seen his performance on October 7th, but I think some people would say this is not the right time to change. The situation is too problematic. We need to stick with our old leaders and so on. And there's a possible scenario in which he somehow maintains a sort of a draw in the elections or manages to delay elections because of an ongoing war. So perhaps for him, it's not the worst kind of way out of the current situation. Again, he hasn't said that publicly on record, but when you see the level of enthusiasm of some of the reporters and people who are fed bits of information by Netanyahu and his team almost on a daily basis, you understand where this is heading. I think it's quite clear that actually I think Trump alluded to that a couple of times, that Bibi is actually applying pressure on him to resume
even ridiculed him for it.
Yeah.
But there is a big change you're describing here in the sense that in the beginning of the war it looked like Israel, Saudi, Emirati,
we're all on the same side.
Everybody wanted the war, and now it's the opposite. Israel is more isolated.
Yeah, because I think the other countries, especially around Iran, have suffered quite a lot and have lost faith in the Americans. The U.S. did not show that it can actually deliver. I would assume that some of these royals in the Gulf states believed in early March that this was possible, that perhaps with the energy released during the riots in Iran in early and mid-January, and perhaps with American and Israeli support, things could actually change. Now, fast forwards 5 months later, we're in a different situation, and I don't think that they would like to take their chances right now. Now, there are no good solutions. Again, what are the options right now? It's either surrendering to all of the Iranian demands, continuing the siege over the Hormuz Strait from the south by the Americans, or go back to full-scale war. None of these options seem very, very promising, but this is the land of limited opportunities, and Trump has to navigate among them. The problem, of course, is the president himself, his persona, his refusal to discuss things seriously, and the fact that most of his calculations are personal. There's a New York Times story published this morning about how much he's focused on his legacy and all of these buildings, different buildings that it's like it's like a Roman emperor or something. It's not about strategy. It's not about a better outcome for humanity or for U.S. interests in the Gulf. It's about him. It was about him from the beginning.
How worried should we Israelis be about the story that came out last week regarding the lack of interceptors and the problem for the U.S. military to provide assistance to Israel while also defending American interests in the region?
First of all, it makes a lot of sense. And now, according to Israeli censorship rules, there's no discussion here of how much we've spent, how much intercepted, how many interceptors were actually launched during the two previous campaigns, and so on. But one could assume, again, that first of all, it takes a lot of time to produce more interceptors, especially Arrow 3 and so on. And secondly, that it's very, very costly. And it's assumed as well that Iran has more missiles than our side has interceptors to deal with. So this is a problem to begin with. Then you have the American side, which is saying openly. By then, there were also reports of the commander of EUCOM, of the European Command, of the U.S. Defense Forces.
Yeah, that's
complaining
what I was alluding to, yes.
Yeah, saying that he would have to choose between defending Israel and defending the homeland, defending America itself. These are serious issues. It's not the end of the world. It doesn't mean that Israel would be totally left to defend itself by itself. But yet, since this is an ongoing war, this is a problematic scenario.
Moving to another theater of this ongoing war, Gaza. Last week, there was an announcement that I have to say gave me a little bit of optimism as someone who lives on the Israeli border with Gaza regarding this agreement reached with Hamas and all the neighboring relevant countries about disarmament and prolonging the ceasefire and eventually an Israeli withdrawal and the entrance of some international force. Is any of that going to happen?
It's hard to tell. Trump announced that there was a progress, of course. That was Friday morning. His other statement was Sunday morning regarding Iran. He's looking for some kind of an achievement, especially considering the fact that there's a deadlock regarding Iran. And he's regained his interest in this specific theater in Gaza after not following it very carefully for a long time. Now, you have to remember that people around him, like Kushner and Witkoff, are not only invested in this personally, they have stakes in this because they want the peace negotiations to succeed. There are assumptions that they have financial interests
with the Gulf, you would say,
with Gulf states and so on regarding Gaza as well. So there are a lot of people who have hopes for.
If you get American companies into Gaza, that sounds like a fantasy right now.
For them,
but look, you could have billions upon billions of projects in just taking the rubble out.
I wouldn't put it past them, the possibility that this has crossed their minds and that they think what they can actually gain from that. So Trump is naturally interested in that as well. And since Mladenov, who heads the Board of Peace, has actually pushed forward with the initiative. It's now called the 15-point plan. It used to be Trump's 20-point plan.
Trimmed a little bit, yeah.
Yeah. So this is an actual plan on the table. And there are assumptions that Hamas, under the specific conditions right now, is willing to somewhat show some flexibility. Show some flexibility. Yet there are enormous problems. One of the major problems is the sequence. What comes first? Does Hamas give up all its weapons first, and only then Israel begins to withdraw its forces from what is called the Yellow Line? The IDF is actually in control of around 65% of the Gaza Strip, which is tiny to begin with. So now the latest news from the Board of Peace yesterday was that actually America accepts Israel's position, and first Hamas has to dismantle its weapons, and then only then would Israel begin its gradual withdrawal from the Strip. It makes sense. I'm not sure it makes sense in the eyes of Hamas, and we've already heard statements from Hamas leaders saying that actually this is not exactly dismantling, and perhaps it's not the light weapons, but only the heavier weapons and so on. There's a significant possibility that the whole thing would blow up and fail. And yet I think there's some urgency from the Gaza side because life inside Gaza is unbearable. 2.1 or 2.2 million people. 98% of them are refugees now, living in tents or in destroyed buildings. This is what they face on the ground on a daily basis. So perhaps there's some room for maneuvering and to some extent even progress. And yet I would doubt whether this is going to come very soon. I think there are going to be a lot of obstacles, and we've learned already that those Trump statements tend to be more optimistic than what actually evolves later on.
One possibility that crossed my mind is perhaps they wanted to put it forward now, the Board of Peace and the Americans involved, strictly in order to prevent Netanyahu and some people within the high echelons of the military who are supportive of him from starting a war in Gaza before the election. And this does, in my opinion, make it somewhat more difficult to do that.
Yes, but we already see behind the scenes briefings from around Netanyahu as well. And we've heard the official statements from ministers Smotrich and Sturk, who are the extreme,
far right elements,
the extreme right in the Netanyahu coalition, already giving details about the agreement and complaining about it. So it's going to be a source of friction in the next few weeks. But yes, I assume you're right. I assume part of the administration's calculations are how to restrain Netanyahu and prevent the Gaza Strip from blowing up again. And again, Netanyahu is looking for some kind of military friction somewhere. As the polls become more and more negative from his point of view, and as we approach the elections, I think we have to consider the possibility of Netanyahu inciting violence somewhere in the region, wherever he gets the chance, in order to switch the agenda.
Is it about preserving the promise of a total victory
Not
that has
so
been
much.
denied so far?
It's about constant military friction. It's about a sense of alarm, and it's about keeping people on their toes and leaving less space for discussion. I think you and I probably agree that the main event here is October 7th, its outcome, the demand to investigate it on an independence.
The question of accountability.
Yeah, there's no word in Hebrew for accountability, as you know.
The English one is also being eroded slowly, by the way.
Yeah, but I think this is the most serious matter for many Israelis and all of the opposition voters. And I think what Netanyahu is trying to do is divert attention to other matters, even Gaza now. Gaza 26, as bad as it looks, is better for him to focus on than Gaza 23.
So we spoke about Iran, Gaza. Another area where he perhaps had the possibility for military friction was Lebanon. That has really gone off the news radar for a while.
It can go wrong pretty quickly. All you need is two incidents with drones that could change the reality there, and we're very, very volatile to that. If there's a loss of soldiers' lives in Lebanon, then the whole focus of the media would go elsewhere, and there will be demands for showing a tougher stance against Hezbollah and so on. For the time being, Israel is restrained there. And again, there's the gap between what Trump tries to describe and portray to the public as much as it's interested and the reality. What he's trying to say is that there's a breakthrough a few weeks back, an agreement signed between Israel and Lebanon. We know from the past that no agreement was ever kept between Israel and Lebanon. You go all the way back to 83. And yet this is where he's heading. So I think that Netanyahu is restrained there as well. Lebanon is deeply connected to Iran. If Iran blows up again, then Lebanon would be part of the issue. But in the long run, this is also problematic because you need to maintain. We now control a so-called security zone. We're back to the year 2000. We have many battalions deployed there, including reservists, because of the current situation. And we keep on destroying Shiite and Sunni villages inside the strip that we've overtaken again by demolishing every house and building in those villages. Minister Katz, the defense minister, actually bragged about this a few days ago. So this is another part of the current reality, which is not something that it's accepted by the international community because they're focused elsewhere. But nobody is happy about this in Western countries and so on. In the long run, this would be a problematic policy for Israel.
Last but not least, there is the West Bank, where we've seen again and again very disturbing images of terror attacks, no other way to call it, by extremist Israeli settlers. And one incident, I think it was about 10 days ago, 4 Palestinians, 2 Israelis killed, and it almost set the whole place on fire.
Yeah, I would be careful about warnings regarding a third intifada, because we've seen in the past the second intifada was different than the first, 1987 and then 2000. And with all of those warnings about a third intifada, until now it never broke. There have
Not
been,
even after October 7th.
Yeah, there have been constant periods of military friction. There's an ongoing one for almost 3 years in the West Bank. These are, if you count Palestinian casualties, more than 1,000 Palestinians were killed in the West Bank since then. But actually, the number of attacks against Israelis is not too high. It has to do, I think, with the fear among Palestinians in the West Bank of another Nakba, another national disaster after what they saw in Gaza. And also I think it has to do with the fear of the settlers and the fact that the army is so strong and so aggressive towards any attempt from the Palestinian side. And yet the friction, the specific friction with, the term is hilltop youth, but it's not.
The extremist settlers.
These are extremist settlers in outposts, and the new term is farms. And they are actually, some of them are taking part in an attempt of ethnic cleansing in certain areas in this region, in the West Bank, in the Upper Jordan Valley, and some in areas around the Ramallah and Nablus and so on. And they're very, very aggressive. And what you see is an attempt for retaliation and revenge from the Palestinian side. It's not organized. These are not groups like Fatah or Hamas. It's mostly villagers. But you see the violence there and the possibility of a higher level of violence, which would include shootings and weapons and so on. And I think that as we approach the elections, there will be a sentiment which would call for that. There will be, as the coalition becomes more worried about the outcome, there is a good chance of this blowing up to an extent. And I'd also add a fourth or fifth arena, I've lost count, which is East Jerusalem and the Temple Mount. We've seen Ben Gvir
always a very delicate place.
Yeah, and Ben Gvir and others are using the Temple Mount for provocations, religious provocations as well. This is always a vulnerable issue from the Palestinian side.
And the wider Muslim world.
Of course, there's more of a danger, so to speak, of a coalition defeat in the upcoming elections. We'll see more and more statements and even action. Perhaps a synagogue founded, established near the mosque. Or there are possible scenarios there, and you have to remember that the police is in Ben Gvir's hands, that you can no longer count on the commander of the Jerusalem district to show some independence or responsibility and prevent such actions if, for instance, Ben Gvir is interested in that. So there's another scenario there. I'd keep my eyes open regarding all of these frontiers. I hope we only discuss politics as the elections approach, but somehow I doubt this would actually happen.
Well, Amos, if you have your eyes open, then we know somebody's looking at least, and we'll continue to read. Are you planning to fly anywhere in the next few weeks?
Not
summer
in the
vacation?
next few weeks. Before the elections in October, I have this plan. We'll see if it actually materializes.
I wish for you and for us that it will become possible. Thank you, Amos.
Thank you.
And that's it for this episode of the Haaretz podcast. Thanks to our editor and producer, Adi Shacham. If you want to continue watching or listening to our podcast and to be sure that you never miss an episode, please subscribe on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, to keep up with all the latest news on Israel, the Middle East, and the Jewish world, don't forget to subscribe and follow haaretz.com.